Good morning. I'm Dr. Sarita, and I'm out walking before it gets really hot today, and there's a lot of wonderful dogs around walking too. So, if you have a pet, you have a dog, and I told you, hey, there's new research that your dog can just eat crickets, and crickets will be good for the dog. And there's some studies. These scientists say crickets are perfectly fine for your dog. So I need you to have your dog eat like 99% crickets because meat is now. I don't. It's just not necessary. You can just have your dog eat a cricket meal. Would you do that to your dog? Would you feed your dog cricket meal? I don't think you would, right? You'd say, wait a minute. Dogs have eaten meat for thousands of years. You've got to study, but how long have these dogs been eating crickets? Like maybe let me wait for at least a couple, maybe like 20 years. Like, let's see how the health effects play out in the dogs for 20 years. And then, I'll think about it, but I'm just not ready right now. So in the 1970s, we pretty much did this experiment, but on people. And I was one of the guinea pigs. I was in 1977, they brought out the Food Pyramid comic book to my class. And I was, I was like 10 years old. And I absorbed all this stuff. And I was told studies had come out and you shouldn't have butter and you shouldn't have eggs and you shouldn't have meat and you should have margarine and you should have lots of heart-healthy whole grain bread. And my great-grandfather, had a take on this around the year, as this consciousness was happening. My mother was in college and she was absorbing the low-fat, high-carb philosophy that the doctors and the scientists knew, this is going to be better for you. Your ancestors are stupid, uninformed, eating fat and butter. So my mother, talked to my great-grandparents and would say things like, hey, there's grease all over the gravy. It's killing us. Why don't you get, you need to get the grease out of the gravy. And they'd say, well, it's always been made like this, or you shouldn't be having butter, you should be having margarine. And she meant well. She thought she was, helping inform them because they were high school educated, and she thought, I'm in college. I need to inform these people. Well, the sad thing is, I remember my great-grandfather saying, and I must have been like 3 or 4 years old. He said, grease is goodness. And if you eat too much bread and potatoes, you'll get fat and sick. Well, how did he know this? Well, he had been a grocer for 50 years. Oh, what beautiful dogs. Oh, yeah. So he'd been a grocer for 50 years. He was not going to change his food ways because some scientists said you shouldn't have butter and meat. Because you know why? He'd seen this play out during the Depression. I'm sure he saw people during the Depression not be able to afford grease or butter or meat with fat on it, and they just ate bread and potatoes and they got fat and sick. Also, our fairy tales tell us about this. Hansel and Gretel. The witch didn't lure the children into the castle or the candy house. Well, it was the house made of candy, right? Hansel and Gretel. She lures them in with candy, with cookies, with cakes, and she fattens them up with cookies and cakes. She doesn't fatten them up with brisket and butter and eggs and pot roast or chicken or roast chicken. No, she feeds them cookies and cakes. So we know instinctively that there's a problem with carbohydrates. And our ancestors, I also remember that too. They would say, don't eat too much bread. Bread is so wonderful. You have fresh bread and they would always kind of want, and then, you have the tradition of bread with, balsamic vinegar and olive oil, and they're saying that vinegar, all that kind of cuts some of the carb load of the bread. Having lemon on your food can also help some of the carbohydrate load. But basically, I was taught, I was the guinea pig here saying, hey, you don't need these ancestral foods. You just need lots of heart-healthy whole grains and breads and then, no butter, no fat. But look how we look now, 30, well, let me think, this, like 50 years after the experiment. In the United States, 2 out of 3 of us have either diabetes or prediabetes. And the heart disease rates are skyrocketing. And, we are unhealthy. And it is because we were nice people. And, instead of, I guess I don't want to hurt your feelings. I'll try the crickets. I'll feed my dog crickets. I don't want to hurt your feelings. I think about that. We were nice people. People in Europe were like, screw that. I'm not feeding my dog crickets. Screw you. You do see how this plays out. You eat it first, right? They didn't, in Europe, they didn't do this. South America, they didn't do this. In Japan, they didn't do this. They didn't adopt the food pyramid. So again, we were nice people, but we blotted out common sense. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? There was nothing wrong with our diet in the United States. Now, what had been added over, say 1970, what had been added over 50 years? Well, cigarettes, smoking. I mean, people started smoking en masse, after World War II in the United States. I remember a time when it was perfectly socially acceptable to smoke. My first job's waitressing, everybody was smoking. You clean the ashtrays. People don't even know what an ashtray is now, that's been totally taken away. But they couldn't, doctors were also, before 1970, the deans in my medical school were all smoking cigarettes. And it was socially acceptable. It was thought to be healthy to smoke. We can't even imagine this now. But that was like the elephant in the room that had been added to the American diet, after World War II. And then it took many years for people to realize, this smoking is not healthy. And I think snacking is the new smoking. Snacking is something that is a new thing. It's not like our ancestors went around eating every 2 hours. They really didn't. They ate, probably 2 times a day. And then, they ate food that gave them satiety, which had fat in it, And then you had traditions, like tea, and you had, other traditions where you would have something to ease your emotional, depletion during the day. And again, a snack is not a nutritional event. It's an emotional event. And that is from Dr. Robert Cywus, who's just so good. And Dr. Robert Cywus, again, he says too, we would never say, oh, have some cigarettes and then go work off the health effects of the cigarettes. We would never say that now. But that's pretty much what we're saying is happening with the carbs, And again, old is gold. We've been part of a big experiment that hasn't worked out so well. And I think about Back to the Future. I look to the past as far as how did people eat 100 years ago. There was nothing wrong with their diet. It's like our ancestors did the science. There's something in your bones that knows when you're eating food that is good. And it's a detox, because really I had been so used to processed and fast food. How I eat now would seem unimaginable. But, basically I just eat, less breads and pastas. I eat less carbs, less frequently. I eat as high quality as I can. But it's basically meat and fat and vegetables, and if you're vegetarian, lentils and fat and vegetables. The traditional Indian diet has ghee and butter and cheese, and I find that you have to have some fat to feel satiated. And that was what they took out of our diet in the 70s. And we need that for brain health. We need that for our neurons, so it was a big de-brainwashing for me, because again, I'd been so trained in this low-fat thing. The dietitians, they would tell us, eat 6 tiny meals a day. Our ancestors did not do that. That's ridiculous. You know, you go to any history museum, you see how people lived. You know, I went to the California Auto Museum here. You know, there were no roadside food stands. You know, people brought their food with them. And, you know, they even had like an adapter on the engine to like cook food through the engine. It was such a fascinating place. But just going to the auto museum and you look, you know, how much things have changed over 100 years just with the automobiles, right? But we're human beings. We're still built like animals for thousands of years ago, you know, just like dogs. So you wouldn't change your dog's diet overnight. So look to what people did 100 years ago. And that was tried and true. And our bodies had evolved to those foods. So I hope this has been helpful. I hope you stay cool and you have a wonderful summer day. You're a cactus living in a rainforest, and there's nothing wrong with you. It's what's wrong, what we've been through, and we've been through a massive gaslighting around food. So I hope you'll consider subscribing. Have a great day. Bye-bye.